Well, this should be our third and final time in chapter 21 because, it's laying a foundation for a sense of fairness and justice of God and his nature. And so we're going to look again at different civil laws as we've been looking through the first 17 verses. But tonight, again, we come to the 18th verse. And as it said in verse 1, these are the judgments, instructions for the civil magistrates, which were typically also a part of the priesthood. Not always, but a big part of the time, these chosen men. Remember, Jethro taught Moses to get some guys that can be over tens, over hundreds, over thousands. And so there's different ways the way it looked. I don't know, honestly, if there was really much of a season where this actually did happen. But nevertheless, we can go back and look at God's nature and see his sense of proportionality, justice, fairness in these things. So verse 18 and 19, talking about if a fight breaks out, there's a brawl. And if men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but he is confined to his bed. If he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So again, it's a real sense of if you win, you lose. So it's sort of don't do it to begin with. Because there's that time, especially as younger people, where they can have a quick trigger. They can have a short wick. There it is. And all of a sudden they can go to, they're perfectly at rest, and then some guy flips them off or cuts them off or says something they don't like, and it can just go from 0 to 100, and next thing you know, you're throwing blows. And he's saying here, that's irresponsible to allow that to happen, period. But in the midst of this fight, one guy is in favor of the fight, and then, of course, as people often do, I'm so mad that you got me in this fight. I'm so mad that you just hit me in the eye. I'm going to have a black eye. And I finally got you down on the ground. I don't want to just say uncle and walk away. I want to pound you a few more times till I get my due, until I can feel like I'm satisfied. And of course, sometimes you can satisfy yourself right to somebody's death, can't you? That often happens. And so to realize if you're going to keep this guy out of work, or he's got to go to the hospital in our days of thinking, but he's having to have some injury time, then it's your fault. Well, he started it. It doesn't matter. You the bigger man wouldn't have fought, period. Now, I understand sometimes you be at peace with all men, far as up to you. It's not always up to you. And then you do got to protect yourself or protect those with you, and you have to fight. And in our day and age, with video cameras and so forth, you can make a good argument that, hey, I was trying to not fight. I was trying to get out of it. I was trying to walk away. This guy didn't let me, and you can get off. But either way, at this time, so people always say, well, what about this, Brian? What about that? And you can give me 100 scenarios. And I'll just simply say this. Justice never really perfectly happens on earth. There's always going to be somebody feeling they got the shorter end of the stick. He should have paid more. He should have had to give in more. He should have had more time in jail. He should have been. Nobody ever walks away feeling like, oh, that was good. That was perfect. That's right. Rarely does that happen. And I honestly don't know if that can happen on earth. And as you look at these laws, almost always you're going to say, well, okay, hold on, I got a question on that. But what if the guy starts it and then the other guy hurts the guy who started it because every one of these, you can give me a list of specifics on a unique case, and I'll simply say that we're going to get a sense of fairness, but it really depends who you talk to, whether it was fair or not. But both sides typically walk away unhappy, typically most of the time. And so here, this was just a pretty standard way of dealing with things at this time. It's interesting if you look at the Code of Hammurabi. You were reading that today, weren't you, Kirk? The Code of Hammurabi? Maybe you picked up on this. Or if you look at the Hittite laws, it's identical. It's really almost word for word identical. So it's interesting that man was made in God's image, and man does have a conscience that God gave him, and man does have a sense of right and wrong. And when the push to shove to make a decision, a sense of fairness. So in essence, the way they would be looking at this, going, well, this is nothing new. This is exactly the way we've dealt with it all our lives. But now God's telling you that that is correct. Because sometimes we think things are a certain way, and we realize that's culturally we think it's okay. But the rest of the world doesn't think it's okay. Or culturally, that doesn't seem weird to us, but to the rest of the world, it seems weird to them. And so, again, in this sense, God's sort of giving us a scale to say, yeah, the world had this one right. The other cultures had that one right. That one they had wrong. And this is, again, important to us to have God's take on these things. So the bottom line is he had to pay for the guy. It sort of depended how long he was in the sick bed, how long he couldn't work. And so you got to pay for all the medical bills, and you got to pay for all the lost days of work. And again, was he given more money for pain and suffering? No, that's today stuff. That's the stuff that goes on in our laws. It didn't at their time. It's just sort of the bare minimum of what had to be covered in that day. Now, again, as you look at this, you're going, wow, this guy could really milk it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Always, the injured party can take an advantage of the situation because he doesn't feel it's fair enough, and he wants to tip it in his favor. And so therefore he pretends he's sick longer than he's sick, or can't walk, or, and then the guy gets the video camera, hires a guy with a video camera, he can't walk, but then he goes to Home Depot and grabs a 50-pound bag of cement and throws it in his car real quick and gets busted. Yeah, these things happen. Law does not bring about perfection whatsoever. Well, verse 20 and 21, now, if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. So you're saying, wow, that's still sort of bad that he's calling him his property. This was a huge step up. You would not find any culture at this time that would not tell you that a slave is just like a piece of property. And if he wants to destroy that piece of property, he perfectly can do that. So to kill his slave and throw him in a hole, he had every right in almost all cultures to do that. But now he's saying here, no, it's a person. He's not simply property. That in actuality, if you really do hurt him, and he dies, you're going to get punished for that. Now, it doesn't tell us what the punishment is, but it was a person. Even though he was a slave, he was a person, and you're going to have to be found guilty for hurting a person. But if the guy doesn't die, then it shows the intent that you weren't trying to kill him. You were trying to, out of anger, punish him somehow. So you think of it, you're up in the hayloft of a barn and the guy does something stupid and you yell at him and he falls off the edge of the barn and dies or gets a broken leg or whatever, or you smack him. Again, in the culture of this time, often people would become slaves because they're fools. They became gamblers. They became alcoholics. They didn't plant their fields. They didn't have a harvest. They didn't take care of their family. So often, the slave owner in this case, the Jewish elder, would have to bring a very rebellious man into obedience. His foolishness is not going to be taken anymore. And so if he did have to have a physical hand in shaping him, he had that ability. But as we're going to see here in just in a minute, it really quenched it from the master doing that. It really is discouraged, as we're going to see here in a minute. He's going to go back and forth. I wish he'd just have all the slave verses in a row. They don't do that. They bounce back and forth the whole chapter. But we're going to see here in a minute that really you cannot hurt them at all. And that's where they're getting it too. Again, does what God want slavery at all? No, he does not. But he can't bend the branch too far. But he bends the branch far enough that eventually they will stop doing it. And that's exactly what happens. And so, again, it does try to distinguish between the intentions of what he did and not did. But nevertheless, now notice here in this section here, and all the sections, you'll notice the favor is always in the side of the accused. So if there's something done, you have to have at least 2, if not 3 witnesses. The person accused really has a big head start to find him guilty. It's an uphill grind. And that is the way the judicial system should always be. In our judicial system today, we do have some things that are really messed up. And I do think they're seriously messed up. And one of them is the prosecutor has the upper hand. They are the one who get to give opening statements. So, typically when the first piece of information you have, it really gets locked in. Now, the next guy to unlock that information really has to work hard to get you to discard that information and then to take new information. It's much harder. So I think that the person being accused should have the first opening statements. And then also in ours, at the very end, the prosecutor gets the last closing argument. And again, I think that the person accused should get the last closing argument. I know I've officiated debates and I have debated. And when you debate, it's down to the seconds. I mean, you got 5 minutes to talk, you got 5 minutes to talk in this particular part of a debate. And you can't go over more than a couple seconds or they're shutting you down because you literally get an extra 30 seconds. It's a big advantage. But again, typically the person being invited to the debate gets to start first because it's a big advantage to start first. And so, again, as you see this, the advantage always goes. So in this case, it's the master who beat the servant. The advantage is to the one who did wrong. And I think that is the way the system should be set up. And we do have some things that are really good. You're innocent till proven guilty. Of course, with the media and so forth, a person can be found guilty in the media for 2 years repeatedly before their first day of court. And is anybody really unbiased as a juror anymore? I don't think so. Well, skipping down to verse 22 to 25 there, we're looking again if a fight breaks out. If a fight breaks out, we're going back to that topic. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judge is determined. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for a burn, wound for a wound, stripe for a stripe. So again, we unwind some really interesting points here. The first, now you got 2 guys fighting each other, And in the middle of the fight, a pregnant woman gets knocked over, and it's like, uh-oh, the water breaks. Or she goes home and is bedridden, and the baby, instead of coming in 2 months, comes right away. But as it turns out, the baby's okay. Then the husband takes it to court and says, this is what I think should be paid for the pain and suffering of my wife in this situation, for the scare that was given to us. And the judges are there to decide whether or not. Now, most of the time, you're going to see here, the judges are really just listening and to make sure. So it's almost like the courtroom itself is just two guys talking it out and deciding what's right. But yet, there's some times where the judge is the one who you make your argument why you think you should get that much, but he actually makes the final decision. And that's the case here. And but if the baby dies, then it's a life for a life. It's considered murder. Now, you say, oh, is the guy put to death? No, he's not. I'm going to tell you what happens with that. But he does have to pay for a life. And then he says, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We're familiar with that, aren't we? So this is dealing with the case of restitution. Okay? And by the way, it's not saying if a guy gets his eye poked out, you poke an eye out. As we're going to see, he's saying you're going to have to pay the value of what the eye would be. So people are reading this going, oh, even the Bible says you cut a guy's hand off. No, it doesn't. It's saying that you got to pay the value of a hand. It's not saying cut the other guy's hands off. He's saying that you got to pay that. So in this case, if the baby died, he would have to pay the sum of the value of the baby that died, a life for a life. So again, we're familiar with this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, because by the time Jesus came on the scene, instead of judges having that sense of fairness in their calculating what the value of restitution this guy has to pay, the people had interpreted as, it's for me. I get to get vengeance on you. So you poked my eye, you need to stand there while I poke your eye out. That is the way they interpreted it. And what did Jesus say about that? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 to 41, he says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. And then down in verse 43 to 44 of Matthew 5, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. So in essence, Jesus says, the whole eye for an eye thing, throw it out. Take that completely out of your calculation. And if they say, hey, an eye for an eye, you knocked that rock over and killed my donkey, and my donkey's worth, $500, and all you have is, you're a poor person, you don't have anything, give me your coat, give me your sandals, say, yeah, do it. Give him whatever he wants. Don't try to fight it. So in essence, he is saying that don't live on this world trying to get fairness, trying to get your piece of what's due you. It's just not going to happen. And there's a lot of bitter people. Have you met people that sue a lot? They are very, very miserable people. They don't enjoy all the money they got at all. And you know what happens? After the first time they sue somebody, they're addicted. Just like gambling. They are addicted. They begin to sue for everything. I have a couple lawyer friends, And it's interesting. But they will sue, and they'll just spend the rest of their life figuring out ways to sue people. But they are very miserable people. And so Jesus is saying, you're trying to get something equal measured out to you, a sense of fairness. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But don't walk around and try to get what's fair to you. Your life is about the kingdom of God. So if a Roman soldier says, the law says you got to carry my armor a mile, carry it 2 miles with joy and gladness. Don't let this world weigh you down, feeling like, man, I'm not getting what's fair. My life's so hard for me. Life's so difficult for me. What's wrong, No. If a guy's trying to get you upset, it's not going to work. He's trying to get you riled and flips you off and screams in your face and knocks your drink out of your hand, and then he gives you a slap. Don't give him the pleasure of an angry person back. Just turn the other cheek and just start praying for him who's persecuting you. And he's screaming at you, I hate your guts. Say, I love you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I love you. I want to bless you. What can I do to fix this? This is what Jesus is saying to do. So even though justice-wise, you may have a leg to stand on here, he slapped you, so now you have the right to fight him, to get into this brawl with him. Jesus is saying, don't do it. What is the kingdom of God principles? To love, to bless, to do good. Is that fair? They curse you, do you do good to them? Jesus said, if they're hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them to drink. Don't return evil for evil. Don't be overcome evil, but overcome evil with what? Good. I think Paul says it even better there in Romans 12. And this is the sense. Again, is it saying here that if a guy gets his eye poked out, you poke his eye out? No, it is not. In context of this chapter, we're going to see in a minute that that's not what's being discussed. It's talking about a sense of portionality of what a person would owe another person for what might happen in a brawl, in a fight. Well, verse 26 and 27, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, yeah, I was going to say here, I didn't say everything I wanted to say on that last verse. Sorry about that. I skipped down. The thing that Jesus is really trying to stop here, or the Lord in these verses 21, 22, 25 again, is the sense of vengeance. And this is the same thing Jesus picks up on. Because when somebody knocks your tooth out, what's our human nature? Do we want to knock one of his teeth out? We want to knock all his teeth out. Correct? You see, that this is the way it is. He broke your arm. You want to break both of his arms and his leg. You see, that's our knee-jerk reaction. And Jesus is saying when the kingdom of God comes into your heart, it's the opposite. Getting slapped doesn't move me. Slap my other side. It still won't move me. You want to make me your slave and carry your armor? That's okay. I'm your servant. I'll carry it as far as you need to go. Where are you staying tonight? Do you imagine how light of a life you live rather than walking around? I got to carry this stupid guy's thing. And then as soon as you get there a mile and you drop his armor off, hey, a mile's right here. No, it's not. It's up there. No, okay, I'll take it up there. That's it. And then another soldier says, hey, are you free? I got another mile. I need you to take mine now. It's like, you're gonna be a smashed individual, completely continual angry individual. And so today again we have these people that are trying to get these huge punitive damages against people and companies way out of proportion. the compensation of what they would get in response, it's outrageous. I remember many years back, it was actually in San Diego, a lady got some McDonald's coffee and she spilled it on herself when she was drinking it. You guys remember this? Got $3 million, over $3 million from McDonald's for getting a little spill on her leg. See, that's just ridiculous. You know how many people tried that kind of thing after that? And what did McDonald's do? They had to make their coffee so warm, not hot at all, because they didn't want to get sued. So weird, bizarre things happen when people try to find justice. And so again here, with this term, even an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, if you look in the verse there, he makes it clear. The judges will determine what will be imposed in the restitution. And then he's given guidance in verse 24 and 25 to the judges. So if anyone harms follow, then you shall give life for life. He's talking to the judges. He's not talking to the individual people here. He's saying to the judges, you will give fair, not vengeance, not overly, but you'll give what's fair. He knocked a tooth out. I want $1 billion. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you lost a tooth, but that you're not going to get what you're thinking you should get out of this. Okay, verse 26 and 27 now. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of an eye. And if he knocks out a tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. So do you hear this? In the earlier ones, we see you have to recognize him as a person. Yes, he's your property, but he's a person as well. And you got to recognize that. And now he says, if anything slightly incidental happens to them, it doesn't say put their eye out. It says that he strikes the eye and destroys it. So again, also knocks out a guy's tooth even. The guy is set free. So again, it's a very strong incentive. Yes, he's a person, but also what if you were to give him some disciplinary action, it cannot in any way permanently hurt them whatsoever. So great protections for those in this servanthood thing. Okay, now in verse 28 to 32, we're going to look at another topic about oxen. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and if its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. So it's an accident. Wild, you have animals, and animals are unpredictable. And if an ox, you're walking in the field, and this ox out of the clear blue, has never done this to anybody ever before, but he just, hurt somebody, didn't kill him, didn't permanently injure anything, just hurt them, then the ox is to be stoned, and the meat is not to be used or eaten. It's just destroyed. Okay? So nobody can benefit from this. The guy who has the ox gets injured, but the other guy doesn't benefit either. So again, if the guy got injured, or said he got injured, and then that guy gets the meat of that ox, it's like, okay, now that's giving people an opportunity to take an advantage of the situation. So nobody can take advantage of it. Nobody wins. Verse 29, but if an ox tended to thrust with his horns in times past, it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman or an ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. So just like an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth, even though there is a quote-unquote death penalty, it's a life for a life. And so what happens in verse 30? There is imposed on him the sum of money that he shall pay to redeem his life. So do you see how this works? So what's the payment? An eye No. A tooth? No. A hand? No. What is it? Your ox killed somebody. So you knew that it had a tendency to go after people, and you didn't lock him up where he couldn't hurt anybody anymore, or you didn't kill him and have him for dinner so he didn't hurt anybody in the future. So what do you do here? Well, it's a life. You have to pay for a life. Not that you yourselves are put to death in this situation, but an eye for an eye. You got to figure out the sum that this person's valued at. And again, the judges would be a part of that. So whether it gored a son or gored a daughter, according to judgment, it shall be done to him. Again, in this culture, adults only had value. Children did not have value. But here, no, it's not just adults who have value. God says children have value as well. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give them their master 30 shekels of silver. The ox shall be stoned. So again, it comes back to being a responsible or neglectful individual. And so you are responsible for your animal. And I understand that you're a busy person. I understand that animals are animals. But you've been told before that he almost went after somebody and hurt them, but they got away and jumped over the fence or whatever. And this has been told to you a couple of times, and you didn't keep it tied up or kept it in a place where it can't hurt anybody, and now it did hurt somebody. You are responsible completely for the neglect of not making sure that animal didn't hurt anybody else in the future. Again, what is the payment? It's a life sentence or a death sentence, it says, but in actuality, there isn't a death sentence except the ox is killed, but the death sentence is you got to pay the amount that your life is valued at, or the person was valued at. And if it's a servant, interesting, 30 shekels of silver. Does that sound familiar to anybody? That's what Judas was paid to betray Jesus, wasn't it? In Matthew 26:15, that Jesus was worth in the eyes of Judas the life of a slave, which is true. What does it say in Philippians 2? Coming into the form of a man, he did not see himself being equal with God as something to achieve, because it was already a fact, but he humbled himself and became the servant of all men. Every single human being, Jesus bore their sin, paid for the sin. 1 John 2 tells us he paid for the sins of the whole world. And he did serve every single rebellious, sinful, evil person on this planet. Well, verse 33 and 34, and if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, and the owner of the pit shall make it good, he shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. So if a guy is digging a pit for whatever reason, in those days it could be digging a well, or they could be digging a cistern to store water, or digging a system to store grain. There's a lot of reasons they dug holes in those days. Well, you're responsible for that open hole. You know, we have so many rules in our country with OSHA, but when you go to other countries, you realize it's better to have too many rules than not enough rules. I can't tell you, having been in Central and South America, how many times I've almost been injured by the most neglectful things that is perfectly acceptable in other countries. Right across from the language school I went to in Costa Rica, they often would just dig these holes, and they would go down 30, 40 feet into the septic or water system or whatever, and all these pieces of rebar are sticking up, and it gets black at night. I mean, just pitch black. There aren't lights everywhere. And man, you got to remember that hole's there, because they don't have anything to let you know there's a hole there. In the semester before I got there, there was a guy who fell in one of those holes, and it just impelled him, and he died. So it's not something that's out there, but I've seen a lot of things like that, especially when I've taken teenagers to other parts of the world, and they're in American mode when they're not in America, and they don't realize how many things are exact. You go up a staircase anywhere in America, every step is the same height, and you'll be okay. In other countries, that you don't have somebody there measuring it. So you got to really be careful going up steps, because even if it's a little bit of a half of an inch off, you'll trip and fall. And I could keep going on, but I won't. But yeah, it's important. You're responsible. So if it's an animal that falls in there, well, you get to keep the life of that animal. But again, the guy's fully responsible in the same type of way. But let's go back to the ox. Now, again, why didn't he talk about get all the ox stuff out of the way at the same time? I don't know. But breaking it up a little bit with the pit story. Now we're going to go back to the ox. Verse 35 and 36. If one man's ox hurts another's so that he dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it. And the dead ox they shall also divide. So now you have two oxes going at each other. And what happens is both of the animals get killed, and they divide things up. Verse 36, though, or if it is known that the ox tended to thrust in time past, its owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. So the animal gets put to death, but he gets to keep it for hurting the other guy's animal. But again, if you look at this, you have to have somebody come, a judge in this case, and they've got to investigate, they've got to analyze the situation, they've got to talk to witnesses, they've got to find out exactly the truth, because you're going to probably have two competing stories, right? And then after they hear the two competing stories, they make the judgment. And like I've said before, I think that people that look at the judicial system and say, it's supposed to be fair, it's not fair. I think the Bible pretty clearly teaches that. And of course, if it were fair, Jesus wouldn't have died on the cross for us. He definitely was innocent. Well, that's it for tonight. We actually finished chapter 21. I think we'll move along a little quicker in the next couple of weeks. Is there any questions on anything or any thoughts? Yes, Jenny.